Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Sharper Skills in 30 Minutes Scenario Development, brought to you today by the Customer Success team of UrbanFootprint. I'm Nick Branch, and joining me today is the Customer Success Manager, Nathan Stone. Our Sharper Skills webinars are designed to highlight new features, showcase tips and tricks, and help you make the best use of the UrbanFootprint platform. In this installment of the Sharper Skills webinar series, we're going to be introducing you to scenario planning as a way to understand and quantify the impacts of change. Nathan is going to show you some examples of scenario planning applied to long-range plans, specific plans, and master plans in this webinar. Then we'll wrap up with a demonstration of scenario planning inside of UrbanFootprint. Before turning things over to Nathan, I'd like to remind you that you can ask questions using the chat function or the Q&A function inside of Zoom. As this webinar is relatively short, we'll save questions until the end. I'd also like to remind you that our next webinar is scheduled for Wednesday, October 21st, 2020, and we'll cover how you can use UrbanFootprint to understand the environmental justice components of your project. We'll show you how to use UrbanFootprint to measure the changes to the plans you have on pollution exposure, physical activity, food access, and more. And with that said, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Nathan.
Great, thanks a lot, Nick. Welcome everybody to our webinar today. This is actually going to be a two-part series for us. So we're going to move right along here. So today we're going to cover the first part, which is going to be 3 types of plans that you can implement as scenarios within your projects in UrbanFootprint. And then we're going to follow this up in several weeks from now in November. We're going to dive in a little bit deeper into those scenarios, and we're actually going to cover things related to multiple timeframes, creating iterations of your projects, and so doing iterative scenario development. We'll get into more detail regarding planning themes, and we'll even talk a little bit about how the analysis modules integrate themselves with these scenarios that you develop. So we really want to highlight that scenario planning is this overarching process of exploring potential changes to a community. And in UrbanFootprint, you can propose land use and policy changes very quickly, and then you can measure those impacts and find out what they look like associated with each of these alternatives that you're considering. So it's really a connected process through data analytics there. And we make this process really simple. It's easy to do. So we kind of have a 3-step approach here. We have the first step, which is making a change to the land use characteristics of a community. You can see here that I've put on here painting land use. That's the function that we call land use scenario planning in the platform. That's kind of how you act that out, is through painting. You can do this from 1 to thousands of parcels. It's whatever you need for your project. You can also do this by attribute, or you can do this by type. And then the second part of scenario planning in UrbanFootprint is running the analytics modules. So you can actually run these for each scenario, and you can see the impact that that is creating within the community. You can then quickly iterate on that and then move it forward. And so number 3 there is that kind of iteration and reporting. So you can actually check the impact of your scenario development within the report mode, do a compare and contrast, and then focus on options that are yielding the results that are needed within the community, and then kind of take a different direction if needed and focus on the options that are working really well. So again, measuring impacts, what does that mean? Well, it means coming up with the real world implications of development, right? So this can be anything from greenfield development and land consumption patterns to water use or accessibility as well. There's lots of different scenario analytics that you can run in your scenarios. And so really you can take any developmental change or land use as well as policy initiatives and model those within the platform. And really UrbanFootprint is, again, it's designed to be iterative and actually look at scenario development in multiple steps. So this is kind of the bigger picture of kind of how this process works within the platform and some things to keep in mind. These are kind of best practices that we kind of reach back to whenever we're talking about scenario development. So under one theme, we have the kind of the spatial question and the thematics of what's happening in a community. So where are these things going? And what kind of theme are we playing out? Is it infill? Is it greenfield? Is it near a community, or is it far flung? Further away from the core. And then the other best practice to think about is your time frame. So you can actually build iteratively multiple time frames within the platform. So you could do long range plans at different time frames, as well as any specific plans as well. And you can make as many scenarios as you need. And then, of course, we do want to focus in on the fact that you can iteratively create additional plans. So you can build upon your paints that you've already made and kind of intensify those future conditions. And you can really do this through quick insights. You're getting these intelligent analytics that are helping you optimize the scenarios that you are creating. And so really this results in a data-driven approach, which is very powerful to understand the real-world implications. And then, of course, you can measure those impacts through the reporting mode. And then you, of course, can track those back to the goals and aspirations of the community and see how those line up. And all of this leads to multiple scenarios and alternatives within the platform in one project. So we often get asked what some of the common themes are for getting started with scenario planning. And so we've just listed out a few potential options here. You know, they run multiple different thematic elements here. We're talking about existing communities versus commercial corridors. We can also look at things like mixed use centers and high capacity transportation. But then we can also look at greenfield areas and kind of status quo development. And then in some rare cases where communities are maybe restructuring and they have had a loss of population, we can even project out repurposing land for that kind of smaller population base as well. We do want to mention that you really can power projects at all scales and scopes within UrbanFootprint. We can get down as tight as a development site for some type of housing development or master plan. We can also, zoom back out a little bit and look at corridors and main streets. That's kind of connected into transit-oriented development as well. So we can do transit corridors along these paths. And then we can also do city scale or regional planning where you're really looking at a whole community as well. So we've got 3 examples we're going to run through today within the application. And the first one we're going to talk about is long-range plans. So again, this is taking the idea that you have a city or a region and you want to apply some type of growth planning alternatives to this region, most likely at multiple timescales. So here you can see in that graphic an area obviously in Utah where they are analyzing 2 different scenarios, actually multiple scenarios for development patterns. The next item we're going to jump into is a specific plan. And so this is neighborhood and Main Street and kind of corridor development. So this is a tighter focus than our citywide planning efforts. And obviously you can do much the same efforts as your overall planning for the city as well. You can do all kinds of land use scenarios. You can even look at redevelopment potential of sites as well. So lots of options there. And then we can get down to the third example, which is going to be master plan. So how do you take something that is proposed to be developed and implement that within the platform? So here we can represent master plans by doing gridding within the platform and actually create smaller parcels and then paint that new development on those parcels. So the scenario development within the UrbanFootprint platform, like we said before, is kind of through this painting action. And so you paint on these land uses using 2 different methodologies. One is our predefined building and place types within our platform. You can see that top graphic there is showing you an example of some of our existing predefined types. You can also make a custom type within the platform as well. So if you wanted to do some localization and actually title that land use as something else, you can even create your own custom type within that library. And then also we just recently released our employment attribute and residential attribute directly specification method. So that is new, and you can see on the bottom screen there, that graphic, you're able to essentially put in your own variables if you know what's happening on the site. All right, so here are 3 examples we're going to run through in the platform today. Starting on the far left, we've got the city scale project, which is a long range plan. This is Louisville, Kentucky, and that's where I'm coming to you from today, actually. And in the middle pane there, you can see a specific plan. This is a transportation corridor, and it's along a predominantly commercial arterial road. And then on the far right there, we're going to run into the master plan portion, which is a development site, which you saw on that previous slide, showing a master plan layout there as well. One thing we do want to kind of make a note of as well is that percentage change and impact analysis is really important to understand how it all coordinates with the project. And so what we like to highlight here is that as the project increases in size and you get a higher number of geometries, the overall sensitivity to land use changes will reduce. So here you can see two examples where I've applied some paint actions within two different scenarios. And the scenario on the very top of that graphic there resulted in less than 1% population change because the community already had 750,000 people living there. The bottom scenario, on the other hand, I applied paints to more geometries and a larger land area. So we're getting a really big boost in population numbers there. Obviously 22% is a pretty high number, but that just shows that your project size and your project boundary are important to keep in mind. And our customer success team can definitely help you navigate this and set this up appropriately to your project. So reach out to us and let us know what your needs are. And with that, I'm going to again mention that we have our paired planning option to work with you. So you can actually reach out to your customer success manager and set up a meeting, and we can do multiple different things in that meeting. We can do project review where we actually talk about the goals and objectives and basically identify what you're trying to achieve. We can also do targeted training within that meeting as well, where we actually start to define your milestones and actually train you in methodologies and workflows that will get those results for you. And then also we can talk about deliverables. So we can actually work on the project in real time. You can also ask us questions as you're working. We can also do follow-up sessions. And so did want to highlight that we do have this program available, and reach out to us if you would like to set up some time to do this. All right, so we're going to jump into the platform demo now, and then we'll come back to question and answer here. All right, so here you can see we have the project in Louisville, Kentucky pulled up. This is a consolidated county city government, so it's showing up sort of like a county boundary for all of those not familiar with this area here. And the first thing I'm going to walk you through is really a broad-based paint application where we're taking essentially a status quo development potential for the future and actually applying a paint. And so this is going to be kind of a residentially focused paint action. It's going to take into account agricultural lands that are in the process of converting to urban uses. And we're really going to make those subdivisions in this potential future land use scenario. So I'm actually going to zoom in here a little bit via my saved map positions. And I'm actually going to go down here to the long range plan, which I identified previous. And you can see here that I have some parcels that are selected within the screen by those blue boundaries. And so if you look in the filter mode, I've gone in and identified some filtering to target some parcels of interest. So what I've done is I've identified agricultural land use types that are currently coded in the base canvas. So I've selected those. And I've actually put some parameters around what kind of sized properties I think could be seeing some development pressure, and I want to play out this potential scenario. So I'm going to select parcels that have a gross area of a minimum of 25 acres and a maximum of 100 acres. So obviously some of these could be still functioning farms. They may be less prone, the larger their size, to future development. So this is a scenario that I'm going to play out here. I'm going to go into the build mode within this scenario canvas. And we're going to see that we've gotten a summary of the things that we've selected within the canvas. So for the status quo residential subdivision scenario, we have 167 parcels, around just under 8,000 acres of land available for development. You can see we have a summary table here, which includes information related to the current characteristics of those parcels, obviously pretty low population since they're agricultural. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually go in and select a type of paint to apply to these parcels. In this case, I'm actually going to use the place types because it includes some assumptions based on right-of-way and some utility information within the platform as well. So you can see here we've got lots of different types of land use. In this case, I'm going to just identify this as residential subdivision. So you can see here that obviously through nearly 8,000 acres of land, we're actually creating a pretty substantial shift in population if this scenario were to be fully built out. To lock these paints in and actually create the scenario, we're going to go ahead and hit the Paint 160 Features button right here. And as we wait for that to load up, it's going to apply those characteristics to those properties. And so when this page refreshes, you'll notice that all of those parcels that we had selected are now showing as yellow, which is signifying single family subdivisions. So we've made that change, and you can see as we scroll down here in the summary charts, we've boosted the population even more. I had previously made some paints within the platform before our webinar here, and so you can see it bumped that number up even more. So now we're up to 30% population increase within the community and 37% increase in dwelling unit type. So lots of information there. Obviously, we could keep going and applying more and more paints. We could potentially take different paths and directions as well. But for now, that's generally what we would see for a long-range plan, a big community plan. So we'll move on to the next potential scenario plan that you could implement within the platform, and that's going to be a specific plan. So I'm going to navigate over to my specific plan tab for that scenario. And I'm again going to use my saved map positions, and I'm going to zoom into that area as well. So you can see here that we have a area of the city that has some parks land around it with neighborhoods. And again, we have this arterial level or collector level road here that has commercial frontage on it as well. So you can see that we've got an interesting mix of land uses happening here. This is generally an area that is a lower intensity commercial utilization. So we could potentially investigate what the result would look like in a scenario where we maybe intensify those land uses slightly and actually build out more employment and more housing along this corridor. So I have previously gone in and actually created kind of a clipping of those parcels. So this is my study area. It was based on a specific buffer around this road network here. So I think it was about 500 feet in each direction. And so I've just grabbed those parcels there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the scenario canvas, and I'm going to play out this potential scenario. So in order to do that, I have to select some parcels to paint. So I'm actually going to use our join technique here, and I'm actually going to use those specific plan parcels that I previously identified. And so what it's going to do is it's going to select those on the screen here. And then I'm also going to add an additional filter as well. So I'm going to go into our land use categories. And you can see here, the ones that are bolded are the ones that exist within this selection. You can see right now we've selected everything within that project analysis area. But really what I'm concerned with is not necessarily taking these residential properties on the backside and converting them, but rather just the frontage properties. So I'm actually going to click on commercial centers and use that as our painting option as well. And I may actually go in and grab vacant as well, just in case there's a couple of vacant parcels. We'd like to intensify those as well. All right, so now that we have those selected, we actually do have 5 vacant parcels as well. We can go back to our build mode, and we can actually identify a building type this time. Since we're working in an infill environment, we don't need to kind of make a set aside for road network because it already exists. So we're going to go into the building type, and we're going to choose something like Main Street Commercial High. So this is a little bit more intense than it exists there today. You can see that we're increasing our population by around 5,000, which is a fantastic shift. We also are bumping up our employment as well because we've intensified the land uses. So once we're happy with this, we can go ahead and hit the Paint 233 features, and we can see that it's going to apply those paints here, and it's going to make an update to this summary chart as well. And again, this is a great example of defining a project boundary. So we're going to notice that once this completes, the percentage change is going to actually be fairly low because we're working on a citywide project scale. We could have constricted the project boundary to just include the neighborhood. So our delta, our percent change would have been much greater. So that's just another tip and trick that we often talk about when we're trying to measure impact. So you can see here, we've increased population citywide by about a percentage point, just under. All right, so we're going to jump into the very last example here, and that's going to be an actual master plan site development. And so I'm going to jump over to our master plan scenario tab, and I'm going to go over here to our save map position and go over to the master plan site. So what you're going to see here is that we have a 24-acre parcel. It's within an urban grid, so it's a gridded structure right now. We have kind of a interstate level roadway system to the left, and we also actually have a rail corridor that abuts the side of this parcel. So this is I'll actually show you just real quickly here on satellite view. This is a parcel that previously had development on it, but it no longer does, and it has that future master plan that has been developed for this site. So we'll go back to our regular view here. And what you'll see is that I've gone in and I've selected the parcel, and I've gridded this up into particular block sizes. We actually have other webinars that have covered the gridding feature. So if you'd like to check that out, you can head on over to our YouTube channel and our website to find out more information about that. But essentially what I've done here is I've created this to kind of model off the grid and be in alignment with that. And then I've gone in and I've identified the uses in that master plan. So if you recall, the plan actually had an outdoor track here. So this development site is actually kind of a community recreation facility with some office space and park. It's something that the community here was lacking. So we had an outdoor track, which I've painted as commercial recreation, an indoor facility as well. We also have some parking lots, some surface parking lots that are painted here as this gray. And then we had a little bit of park plaza area as well, which you can see in this green. And then one thing you may not have noticed in that image is on the back side, it actually had a couple of Main Street style buildings, some 3-story brick buildings as well. So that is incorporated here. And then the last is this kind of corner here, which is where the 4-story office building was going to go. So once you have your parcels gridded up, we could actually go in and use this box selection tool, and we could select each of these parcels. And then we can go into the build mode, and we can find an appropriate land use to actually apply to this site. So in this case, we know that this is the office portion of the master plan. And so we could do something like a low-rise office in this case, or maybe even a mid-rise, depending on how many stories we're looking at. And so we can apply this by selecting that. You can see that employment's going to shift even more than what I've currently painted this. And again, for this gridded scenario and this master plan, it's the same process as the other two. You just hit this paint features button, and then it's going to apply that paint to that location. So you can see we've even had the ability to create some green buffer areas against the rail line and the perimeter of the site, which is going to have trees planted around it. And that was also done through that gridding process as well. So that is actually our 3 examples for today. We're going to turn it over to question and answer. And just a reminder, we do have the part 2 of this webinar coming up in November. So please take a look at that. And schedule yourself for that, because we're going to dive in deeper to time frames and how the analytics will work and how you can integrate those into the process of scenario planning as well. So thanks for your time, and I'll turn it over to Nick.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nathan. It looks like we've got 2 questions so far. Please feel free to ask your questions into the chat or the Q&A. The first one we have is, it seems like a pretty straightforward question, but how many scenarios can you have inside of a project?
Oh yes, so you can actually create kind of as many tabs as you want within there. So if you're going to run, let's say, 5 or 6 different final scenarios, but you need to create 3, 4, 5, iterative scenarios to get to those final conditions as you're mapping what those changes are going to be, that's totally fine. So there isn't a limit at this point. You're actually unlimited.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, it also allows you to have more custom POIs if you wanted to take that route as well. I guess the next question that we had here, how can a customer use scenarios within a proposal? How would they sort of show what you sort of showed to us?
Yeah, so if you're going after work for a community and they currently have a proposal out, you could actually, given the fact that our scenario planning tool is really easy to work with, and you can do some pretty interesting selection techniques. You could actually go in and kind of share your vision a little bit before you even get the project, and actually incorporate that into your proposal through some quick workflows, and share that with the client. You can show potential options and not necessarily say that these are the definitive, but just show the capability that you have as a firm. Obviously, this is going to separate you from some other competition. If you're already getting into the scenario development process even before you've been awarded the contract. So we would certainly like to talk to you more about this. If you want to integrate proposals into your workflows, let us know, and we'll probably dive a little bit deeper into that second webinar, how you could kind of navigate that a little bit more.
Awesome. And it looks like the next question coming in is what metrics that you showed today inside of UrbanFootprint, what metrics does UrbanFootprint actually produce to help me understand which scenarios are performing the best?
Yeah, so we actually have several of our analytics modules that are available to be run on the scenarios that are really going to give you quick insight into kind of the performance of these scenarios. So, one of the couple that I usually will show people right away is the walk and transit accessibility. So this is going to measure the pre and post condition for access to amenities. So this is things like parks and schools. What are those walk sheds looking like? Did we decrease people's access to those types of facilities because we put people in places that are kind of more further away than we would like to those types of amenities? So it really does help show the difference over time between those. We've got a couple of other modules that are really key as well. We can look at things like transportation and emissions. So obviously land development patterns are going to impact things like vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions. And those spatial patterns are very dependent on that. So you can actually model out the differences between different scenarios and their impact on those types of results. You can also look at things like risk and resilience. So obviously, we all know that there are waterways within our community. Some communities suffer from obviously some fire risk zones as well. So we actually do have the mapping capability to show you where households are within hazard zones as well as commercial businesses. So that's going to give you employment. And we can actually help you track where land is being developed and if it's increasing or decreasing your risk. So that's a really interesting thing as well. We do have some other things within the platform. Land consumption is always an interesting one to look at. So as you're building up land and infilling or doing greenfields, we can actually measure that for you. So there's really a ton of different things you can look at within the analytics modules, and we'll cover a lot of those in that next session.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth always bringing up that, everything that you're sort of describing and everything you're walking through is very easy to work through when you're working inside of the data table. It's also one of those things that sort of when you were showing earlier during the gridding, being able to select those 4 gridded parcels for the office building, you'd be able to see the impact results inside of the next scenario. Of course, that's sort of giving a behind the scenes look at the next webinar coming down the pike.
Yeah.
Looking here, doesn't look like we have any more questions. Anything else that you want to cover here, Nathan?
No, I think that's it. So we'll be sending out additional newsletters, and it'll have a link in there for you to schedule yourself for our next webinar. So thanks again for joining us today, and feel free to reach out to your customer success manager. Jason and myself are both available anytime. So let us know if we can help in any way.
Perfect. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for attending the webinar.